Aaron, just a quick question. So you mentioned that that certification. I did track one, I think a year or two ago. Is there a way to get a record of that registration?
So
How do you prove that, or what? If or do
yes,
you even need to?
yeah. So you typically will just state the date of the training that you received at for Faith Biblical Counseling. Like if you did our training at our, and then you just contact our, we can send a proof of your registration, et cetera. We usually have records for who registered for our conferences if they have questions. But usually, if you just put the date, the certifying group will contact us if they have concerns. Did they ask you to have a proof of your registration?
No, I haven't gone forward with the process yet, so I'm just
Oh,
kind
okay.
of asking just in case.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have issues, you can always contact our counseling, and we can issue a statement that you received training from our training center. But usually they'll ask you just to put the date of the training and the location, and then they'll maybe confirm with us.
And then the second question is this track. So what? Moving on to track two is what other certifications does that lead to? Is there a higher level of certification? I think you just mentioned that.
Yeah. Yeah. So think of so track one is our foundations, and each track is really kind of building on. So think of we're covering foundations of counseling. Track two, we kind of are building on the track three. Track three, we get into more specific. We tend to get into very more specific topics. Track four is our advanced training. That is new content every year, and that tends to be especially more like think of continuing education for counselors who are certified tend to go to that track every year because it's new content every single year, and it tends to be on things related to counseling that are more modern or cutting edge issues that we're trying to think through and work through as counselors. And so that's part of kind of a continuing education. But for certification, track one foundations, which is track one is what's needed. Then you have the observation requirement, which is observing the counseling, and you can either come to like we have an observation like our track one training that you can observe live, or you can watch videos, right? The observation videos. And then the ACBC certification process, the next step is so you have second phases, you have exams you have to write, the counseling exam, the theology exam. And then after your exams are approved, the third step is now supervised counseling, where you're counseling and a fellow, an ACBC certified fellow, is observing you as you're counseling and that's a minimum of 50 hours. Okay. And then after 50 supervised hours, in addition to the observation hours of just observing counseling, then you can be ACBC certified.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. And then once you're certified, there's a continuing education component, that they encourage. It's not required yet, but most likely it may be. We don't know that they're going to decide. That's something that's going to be decided this year. But the point is to try to keep counselors continuing to grow in their counseling skills, that's where like a track four would best serve. Great question, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I'd love to hear if you want to use the chat feature there and just share what was one encouragement that you had. You can either use the chat or you can feel free to turn on your camera and we can just even have a conversation with one another. Has anybody just had something that really stood out to them from one of the lectures, whether it was, again, the Psalm 73 or We Becoming What We Worship? Let's just especially make sure this is a great time just to encourage one another, what God's been putting on our hearts and what ways we've been encouraged.
Hey, it's Julie Judson.
Hey, Julie.
The thing that really stood out to me in the Psalm 73 illustration is why do we want what we want so badly? It's because we're deceived. Isn't that the truth? We do what, why do we do what we do? Because we want what we want, and it's just it all comes down to the fact that we're deceived and we want things ahead of God.
Yeah. And what, as you thought about Psalm 73, so if that's naturally, right, we're going to set idols before our face, right? That I think Calvary says our hearts are an idol factory. And this is, right, we have what from 73 gives us hope to how we can help counselees and in our own hearts what was kind of the solution for, when our hearts are tempted that way? How would that affect how I would counsel somebody when right before they're looking at it seems unfair and they're looking at the injustice? Anybody have some thoughts of just what they would share that would encourage somebody as you think about your own situation? What helps you in those moments?
It's turning it back to God, taking our eyes off of our situations, taking our eyes off of ourselves, and just focusing on the Lord. I can't remember if it was in this particular lecture where he had his hand in front of his face, and how we see the problem and we don't see God outside of that. It's focusing on the Lord, changing our perspective, changing our focus.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done sometimes, and when we're in the thick of it, especially, it's hard to do. But that's when we need to. That's when the rubber meets the road, per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's
too. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go, Jeremy, please.
I think too, focusing on God, but also realizing the eternal perspective, right? Like, I think he pointed back to that to say, look, we think about, we're in this life, so that's what we're focused on, but there's way more.
Yeah.
And this is just a moment we're living in. We have to keep that in perspective.
Yeah. And so go ahead. Yeah, go, Barbara.
I think that's one of the big challenges, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in the circumstances that you're experiencing. And sometimes they're really, really hard circumstances. So that's the thing of coming back to that place where you can see that eternal perspective of, this is a moment, where it talks about the momentary light afflictions, but all that's coming ahead, all the glory that's coming ahead. And I think that really helps.
Yeah. And so as counselors, I think, and talk about eternal perspective, how do we narrow down to the specific desire, right? And focusing that desire on the eternal. So for example, let's say you have a counselee who is right now in rejection, has been divorced unwillingly by a spouse, and is now left, and they are devastated, and they want acceptance, and they desire it so badly, and they look around at those around them, and they have happy marriages, and they see that, and the reality though before them is that there is nobody who wants to marry them, and they're now in this position. What specific eternal truths would you go to that would point them eternally to that desire? Any passages that come to your mind as you think of that desire of, I am rejected in this life, and I am not getting this desire satisfied, and I may not.
Mm-hmm.
How do you point to that specific desire eternally? What are some scriptures that would come to mind as you're counseling somebody?
Well, I know that.
Go ahead, Barbara.
There's a scripture that talks about God being your husband, or being the one who will carry you. And, that's to me an encouraging verse, just being married, even, because there's times when I've been really hurt by my husband's actions or things that he's done. And knowing that ultimately it's not about my husband and myself, but it's about me and Jesus. And so when you're constantly focusing on, he's the lover of my soul, he's the one who is my all in all, the end result, that helps you to walk through those really difficult places, in relationship.
Yeah, that's great.
I think of John 3:16, right? Because I know that's like a classic scripture we use for a lot of things, but that's one where it's like encompasses all, right? He loves you so, so much. He loves you right now. And he gave his one and only son, right? So he loved you that much, like that husband or wife who left you did not love you that much, right? The one that rejected you didn't love you that much. And here is someone offering you salvation, eternal life, right? He's not just offering it, he gave his only son for you to have it.
Yeah,
I think of Romans 8:15, for you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. And I think, you know, for me, I was adopted as a kid, and it shows that God chose us. It's not that he just was stuck with us, but he actually wanted to choose us.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we may not feel loved by, you know, a spouse, but we can always rest in the fact that we're loved by God.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, I love the vision of Revelation, God's presence being with his people and him sheltering them with his presence, right? And there's no more, I mean, those are just some beautiful passages of, you know, I fear rejection, but what God is saying, right? There's communion with him forever. And that's, I think, you know, orienting people toward that eternal is what you have to do. Otherwise, right, there is a level of you're giving them something that's second best, right? In exchange, and that, those longings, those good desires that many times were satisfied in a good gift that God gave, but it's not the best gift, right? That's where I think we can encourage those. Other points just from the lectures that was an encouragement to you, or a question that you may have had about one of the sessions? Either way. So how might you use, let's say, Isaiah 6 or Psalm 115, right, with your counselees? So you saw Brent in a lot of ways teach what these passages teach, but, you know, part of me, so imagine you're talking with your counselee about Psalm 115, right, and he's reading about the idols that don't hear and they don't speak and they don't, how would you connect that? Right? Because most people today probably don't think about worshiping and bowing down in American society to an idol, right? And so I think those types of passages can be pretty distant for our counselees. So how might you, if you were teaching that in your counseling, connect that so your counselee understands the reality of what really the psalmist, I think, is trying to get at? Any thoughts to that?
I think go ahead.
Go ahead, Tam.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just coming back in. I just got dropped off.
Oh, no problem.
I was just going to say that sometimes, I forgot. I totally lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay.
What was the question you asked again?
Yeah, so how would I, right? So I think if we try to, you know, and sometimes in counseling we might take somebody to, hey, you're becoming what you worship, you know, and somebody, I think that's a difficult idea for a lot of people to see. I mean, the horrors, right? You're not living out your purpose. You're kind of becoming useless. How do you, as a counselor, right, try to connect that for your counselees? Because I think most counselees, right, they're gonna think like, I'm not worshiping something that's like doesn't, you know, like an idol, like in Psalm 115.
Okay, I know one of the questions I was say is, for me, trying to ask that question of, you know, are you sinning to get what you want? You know, something that you're doing or you're pursuing or whatever. Are you sinning in order to do that? Well, that's idolatry for you if you're sinning in order to get what you want. So that's one way that I would question that.
I think another way is to ask how they spend their time, right? So you ask, what do you do in a week? Like, you know, describe your week, right? And if they're spending most of their time doing one thing, even if they don't view it as a sinful thing, right? It may not be a sinful thing, but the fact that they're doing it, you know, above and beyond, you know, worshiping, then, you know, I think that makes it a little bit easier to point out. Like, even if you wrote it down and so they could see it, like, you know, like a tree or something, so they could see how big that portion of it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's helpful. You know, when I think of Psalm 115, right? So you can turn there if you want, but, you know, verses 1 through 8, you know, maybe we use a lot in counseling of, you know, not to us, this is our purpose. It's not to us, it's your name, it's for your glory, because of your faithfulness, because of your truth, right? And now we're talking about, look at what happens when you put your trust in these idols, right? You become, right, like those you trust in. And I think it's going to be sometimes hard for a counselee, again, just to connect, how is that true in my life, with something like a desire for security. Well, think of what the painting in the picture here is we're not fulfilling our purpose and representing what God is like, right? And we put something else there. And I think you can kind of illustrate that in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of idolatrous situations where you're going to become insensitive to the needs of people around you, right? So let's say, I'll say, I'm going to use a very common illustration I do a lot with counsel. Let's say with sexual immorality and pornography. Well, by you putting this desire for pleasure in your life, and this is what's central for you, what has happened to you? You actually have become useless, right, for the purpose that God has given you for, right? Rather than flourishing the lives of other people, what are you doing when you participate in this, right? As far as, when you think about, are you becoming sensitive to the needs and concerns of your spouse or insensitive, right? I mean, and so you can start beginning to connect, right? You're blind to the needs of your kids around you, or somebody, right, who desires and is, their work has become their idol for success, right? I think we can, again, paint the picture. What do you become like when anything other than God is central? And the picture is you're becoming useless for God's glorious purposes to flourish and love the people around you and bring glory to his name. And instead, what people are going to see is really insensitivity many times, right? When you love something more than the Lord. And especially relationships are one of the first ways I think people see that, right? And how you treat other people. And so I think that's a great, that would just be my thought is, if you're trying to teach this to somebody, I often, with even like somebody who struggled with drunkenness with one of my counselors recently, I say, when's the last time alcohol showed you mercy? Does alcohol care or listen to you? Right? The whole point is you're trying to just help them understand, right? Alcohol, right? The thing that you are lusting after, it's powerless to save you. It doesn't care. It's not there with you always. And you contrast that to the character of God, and you're like, why would I worship this thing? Why would I put this thing central? Right? Whether it's work, whether it's a person, it won't always love you. It will not always be there. It will not always speak the truth. Right? And that's, to me, how I would kind of try to help my counselee really connect, what is this psalmist teaching in a culture and time where this is what they live and they see it all. And I think for us, we just tend not to think in those terms, but I think that's the picture he's trying to paint, this uselessness of, we're not representing God as we should. And I think hopefully that is helpful for you. But well, for time's sake, if you're welcome to go, but I'm happy to stay in the chat as long as you would like. And so, right now, just for 8 o'clock, so you can go ahead and leave if you like to. But if you have other questions, I want to be available. So that's what kind of this time is for. But I know some people really want to stick to the schedule and be done at a certain time. So if that's you, it's okay. But I'm happy to stay on too to ask questions additionally.
I thought it was really fascinating. You said, what did you take from this teaching? And I thought it was really fascinating, the chart that I now remember from the first track, right, of the states of being and behavior. And really it doesn't connect to Psalm 115 directly, but I think when you were asking, how are you going to get them to see that? I was thinking about the state of being. So when you were doing that, or after you did what you did, or as you go through your life, what is your state of being? Are you experiencing joy? Are you experiencing peace? Or are you experiencing guilt or anger or distress? And if you're experiencing that, that is a fruit of what your heart is desiring, right? Yeah. And so that's a symptom, just like anything. When you take your temperature and it's high, you might not really realize at first there's a problem, but that kind of shows you, well, maybe it's a little bit more serious than I thought it was, because I should be feeling these other things. If I'm really doing the right thing in my life. I should be feeling joy or peace or being blessed or satisfaction. And I'm not feeling those things when I work all the time. Even though I'm striving, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
So there's always a want of more, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Like it's like what is it? The example, right, of a check engine light, right? The blinker light's going off. Many times there's emotions to check under the hood of, what's going on? Where is my joy found? Why am I doing this? Great. Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
I was going to ask one question, Aaron, are all the sessions recorded?
Yeah. So all the sessions that you have are recorded and available. And so you'll have access to the ones this weekend for the next 30 days to review and to watch. And then beginning next weekend, then you'll get the next sessions, that weekend's worth of sessions for the next 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last 10 sessions you'll have for the next 30 days. So kind of all the sessions of this weekend you'll be able to watch for the next 30 days. And then you basically, those turn off when you start the next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, so that's where if you it's okay, like if you can go back and watch the videos if you want to talk more. I want you to feel, because this is to me, I want the live hosting. Our goal is we really want to interact with you, answer questions, make sure that you're getting the most out of this time. So
yeah, I was feeling as I watched it, I was thinking to myself, boy, it would be nice if we could flip the format to say, hey, you have the trainings for up to a month before the session, and then you could go through the trainings and then interact as part of the session, right? To say, hey, this is all interactive, so that you would really be able to process the material if they're recorded anyway. Like being in a live environment, it was a different experience, right? Because you're processing at the same time, you're interacting with people. But I think also the nature of this is, I don't know, maybe some people aren't in my position, but I work and I'm in Wisconsin, so I'm an hour behind you, right? You guys it's a little bit later for you.
yeah.
But I'm working all day, and then I'm coming to this for 4 or 5 hours, and I'm like, man, I'm not getting as much as I could out of it because I'm tired. And I'm not able to process in that way. But if you could take it like, 2 sessions a week and then roll into that weekend, and or even do it one weekend a month, or one session a weekend, or 2 sessions a weekend, to kind of take it in smaller bites to have more time to reflect on it. And I think it's valuable, to be able to go for another 30 days and look over it again. But then, you're not going to be able to process it with anyone before the next session, right?
Yeah. No, that's helpful feedback. Because we want to seek to how we can improve and, try to get the most out of the experience. And I hope too, like, we'll have a couple live sessions tomorrow, but then, even in the next month when I'll be hosting again in October, I really feel free to bring up any questions of past sessions, too, if you're processing over these next month, that's kind of what I want to be able to. It really could be anything, even general, not even related to the sessions. We just want to be available to really help you in whatever way we think is most helpful, and try to probe to some of the sessions to think about. But I do appreciate that feedback, though. We'll definitely share that with our folks.
Yeah.
Great. Do you have any other questions just in general as you think about just personal counseling or some of the topics today?
It looks like Rex has a question, though.
Oh, Rex, you got a question for me?
Well, this is an outside the box question.
Okay.
I basically need to know how to get back into the next session.
Okay.
Because I watched 2 of the lecture presentations by Brent Oakland, and then I think I had a conversation with you by phone, and so I just want to try and get things squared away before we get too far into this conference.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you still have Event Squid open on your computer?
I'll catch you guys later. I'll leave you to it.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
God bless.
Yep.
No, I don't think so. I came in apparently late into your session, and then I started hearing this reverberation back through the speaker.